Firstly, as someone deeply involved in advancing women's leadership and empowerment, what do you see as the most critical factors in accelerating progress towards economic empowerment for women, particularly those facing intersecting challenges?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there are a number of things. And I think the main one is leadership, and events like this and organisations like UN Women do a really wonderful job of highlighting incredible leaders, incredible female leaders across the world and here in Australia. I work with leadership development organisations like Women and Leadership Australia. We partner with them, have done for 3-4 years. And also organisations like Pathways to Politics for Women and Generation Women. So the work that we do is we align with these women's peak organisations, and we help them and encourage them to diversify their women's leadership. So I think certainly for intersectionality, diversification and inclusion in women's leadership is key. And also just selecting really good leaders. I noticed that this year Women and Leadership Australia chose Sam Mostyn as their the winner of their National Leadership in Excellence Award, and I thought that was a really great decision. So seeing more of our wonderful women in very, very senior leadership roles, I think, is key.
So important. Sam Mostyn definitely is an inspiration. How can initiatives, you mentioned them, like Pathways to Politics for Women, play a role in not only fostering that political participation, but also facilitating economic empowerment for women, especially in our traditionally marginalised communities?
Yeah, so the work that we do with Pathways is we run a short workshop that creates a pipeline of marginalised women that come through our programs, and we encourage them to go into the Pathways programs. The Pathways to Politics for Women program is in universities in all states and territories now, and they have been teaching women how to get elected and building the capability of women across the country to create, a pipeline of very empowered Australian women in politics. And I think it can't be underestimated, the incredible work that they've done, and also their partnership with us in acknowledging that we need more women from First Nations and called culturally and linguistically diverse communities to also go into politics. The more representation we have, the more diversity we have in politics, the more, I think, harmonious and unified our country becomes. And so I think, again, that speaks to leadership as well, really important decisions around great female leaders in politics in particular. So I think, and that leads to, better decisions being made in terms of economics and financial inclusion for women.
Yeah, and it starts with knowing that those opportunities are out there, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So in your experience, what are some effective strategies for overcoming those systemic barriers that hinder women's access to financial resources, opportunities and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so there are a number of systemic barriers, particularly for marginalised women. What we know, and I'll speak about my experience as a First Nations woman, we make up 2% of Australia's population, but currently we also make up 37% of the female prison population. First Nations women are the most marginalised demographic in this country, and we are an incredibly affluent country, and so it always is incredibly confronting for me, particularly, and for all of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander sisters to see the statistics that reflect us and our disadvantage. There are very big challenges for us, and also those challenges are reflected across multicultural communities as well. Some of the really simple ways of overcoming these barriers and challenges in terms of financial inclusion that I would recommend. I'm actually a business advisor, so I work in another business called Blacks Capital, and I've spent 5 years helping Indigenous businesses and teaching Indigenous women how to start their businesses. And one of the questions that I hear on a regular basis is when I'm teaching women how to start their business, they often say, "So what do I charge? What hourly rate should I charge a client? What am I valued at?" And that's a really, really crucial question. It's a really important question for particularly a marginalised woman to really understand, what are you valued at? Because historically we've been undervalued or devalued. And I love answering that question, and telling them, according to what category what industry they work in, and what I know about hourly rates that are charged. I love telling them that you can charge $250 an hour. And the look on their face, they're very, very surprised, or you are worth $1,000 a day. And so, it's that, I think a really simple solution is acknowledging when marginalised people explain what their hourly rate is or what they believe they're valued at. I think accepting that and, being willing to pay women what they're worth, I think that will reduce a lot of the barriers in terms of financial inclusion.
Yeah, and it's not something that you grow up thinking about, is it? It starts at such a young age, not feeling like you're worth, well, not worth as much, but that you can ask for as much as maybe some of your male counterparts.
I know, and it's a female affliction, isn't it? We're not very good at asking for what we want, and we're also really challenged when it comes to negotiating, right?
Yes, I have that problem myself. So as a leader committed to empowering women economically, what measures do you believe are crucial in closing the gender pay gap and ensuring equal access to employment and career advancement opportunities?
So the gender pay gap, certainly from a marginalised perspective, I think is often I think it's a first world problem for, when from the perspective of marginalised women, we're often not thinking about it because we tend to be concerned about other things. So I think, in terms of marginalisation, many of us are concerned with working out how to get paid or how to have our clients pay us if we're in business, how to hold on to our jobs if we're working in organisations. And then also a lot of us come from large communities and large families where many people are unemployed. So some of us come into our families and communities with our wage, and that wage is dispersed and spread across a number of families. So many of us are not thinking about the gender pay gap. A lot of us are still very much in survival mode. And we know that because of the statistics, again, if you look at First Nations people, 50% of First Nations people live with severe financial stress, and only 1 in 10 First Nations people feel financially secure. So thinking about the gender pay gap is sort of a long, long way down the list of our priorities. Having said that, I'm going to say something really controversial.
Good.
I think, personally, if I was in charge, the solution that I would apply is the Q word, which a lot of people don't like, and that is quotas.
Yes.
Yeah, we've been battling these gender pay gaps and just the gender equality issue for many, many decades, 230 years, haven't we?
Yeah.
And we're still battling it today. So I think this notion of quotas that continues to be battered away, I think we need to seriously look at it and implement it. I know there are lots of different industries that do implement quotas and have seen effective change. Because I work in empowering women in politics, I read a lot about what's going on in terms of empowering marginalised women in countries around the world and how they have managed to break down some very significant barriers in terms of political representation. And I read recently about how African women managed to break down those barriers of representation in certainly as prime ministers or leaders of their own countries. And they decided after hundreds of years that the boys are just not going to let us in. So they legislated parity laws. So there are 16 countries across Africa that now have legislated parity laws. And that has resulted in, 3-4 women across African nations taking up presidential and prime ministerial roles.
Wow.
So quotas do work in very difficult situations. We know in Indonesia they have a 30% quota for women in political representation. We've seen how quotas have worked across the Middle East. The Middle East was historically at the bottom of the list in terms of women's leadership, in terms of representation in politics and women in business. And again, many of those countries introduced quotas. And it's had an incredibly quick effect in that some of the Middle Eastern countries that historically were at the very bottom of the long list of women in political leadership, within a 5-year period, they're now number 2 at the top of the list. So quotas do work and can be very, very effective.
I like the Q word.
Yeah.
I think we should roll that out. Can you share some examples of successful initiatives or programs you've been involved with that have significantly contributed to advancing economic empowerment for women, particularly in underrepresented communities?
Yeah, so I think one of the programs that I've worked on is called Titters in Business, and it's a federally funded program, and it's run by Murrowan, an Aboriginal consulting firm. And we've seen incredible success with that. Titters in Business teaches First Nations women how to start micro-enterprises. And we've taught over 200 women how to start their businesses. And that has had a really amazing effect across a lot of families and a lot of communities, because finally there's someone actually teaching First Nations women how to start businesses. And it's not just starting businesses. The program provides all kinds of masterclasses and other empowerment workshops that support the women as they do start their own little businesses. And the flow-on effect of that is magic, because when you teach a mum how to start her business, we then encourage her to teach her teenage daughter or her teenage son how to register his ABN or her ABN and start their little business. And then we encourage them to outsource to their children. So we're creating little directors and mini directors. And so that's creating a really wonderful flow-on effect and empowering families and mums to get on board with understanding how you can take economic empowerment into your own hands.
It would just make such a big difference to know that from a young age, wouldn't it? I ring my mum for financial advice now and she puts me on to Dad.
Yeah.
It starts at a very young age. Yeah. How do you envision the collaboration between government, the private sector and civil society organisations in accelerating progress towards female economic empowerment, and what roles do you see yourself playing in such collaborations?
Yeah, so I've sat on a number of roundtables with government and been involved in consultation with industry and government in relation to economic empowerment strategies. And it's actually been really wonderful, particularly since the Albanese government has been elected. What we've seen is more empathic government, a government that is willing to listen to women and First Nations people, and that's had a really wonderful impact, I think, holistically across the country. We're seeing empathic leadership, like the amazing women that have spoken today, and as a flow-on effect of that, we're seeing really great policies that are in these women's strategy documents, the federal ones, the state-based female strategies. We're seeing an incredible amount of change in such a short space of time with this Albanese government. So I think, again, that speaks to leadership. It speaks to empathic and inclusive leadership. And I think we just need to keep continuing that, keep doing more of that.
Okay, thank you. And our last one from me, before I open it up, is someone who has worked across various sectors. What innovative approaches or solutions do you believe hold the most promise in accelerating economic empowerment for women and promoting gender equality in the workforce and beyond, outside of that?
I think it's pretty important to pay women what they're worth. And to pay women for every hour that they work as well. I think there's an enormous expectation on women to provide free service and to volunteer. We hear that a lot from women. And I think that expectation placed on marginalised women is unreasonable. And I think what we need to do as a country, we're a very, very affluent country. And I think what we need to do is acknowledge that there is plenty of money in the world, and we can afford to pay particularly marginalised women, their hourly rate and what they're worth, and also encourage more organisations and more, more people to consider that.
I agree with everything you've said. Well said. Thank you, Kat. Does anyone in the audience have a question for Kat? We'll come around with a microphone. So just raise your hand. It's compulsory. Someone must... There we go, up the back here in red. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights about how businesses can be empowering women. I guess I'm curious about the Q word, the quota, and you talked about how quotas can actually have a positive and quick effect. Now, I guess coming from government, sometimes we know that legislative changes can take time. So I'm curious to understand more about how countries, the ones that you've shared, what are the sort of challenges that they faced in implementing those legislative changes, and how did they overcome it?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know the intricate details of that, but what I have noticed is that it actually comes down to leadership. If you see what happened in Rwanda post-genocide, they have the highest number of women in politics, in political representation in Rwanda, and that decision was actually made by a male prime minister of that country, or president, I'm not sure. So that was male leadership that instigated that change. And so there was a question before to Maricini about, how do we encourage men to come on this journey with us? And I actually think we don't need to encourage men. There are plenty of men in the world that have paved the way for us. So I think finding those male allies and working with them and having them lead, allowing them to lead us down, into new paths is key. In terms of strategies, I'd have to come back to you on that, but I think a lot of what I've seen in terms of political representation and really quick changes across different regions around the world, sometimes it's come as a result of a change in leadership. So young men taking over from their fathers who were sheikhs or presidents or kings. This younger generation, they may have been educated abroad in Oxford educations, and they recognise that women's empowerment is de rigueur. It's the order of the day. So they go back to their countries and they implement new strategies. Could be as simple as that.
Thank you so much for your question. Anyone else got any questions they'd like to ask? We'll go here in the green first. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. I just wanted to pull on you speaking about women being paid what they're worth, and then also the difficulty in negotiation. And I think for a lot of women, they've probably been in that situation to, what do I ask for? How do I ask for it? And how do I not come across as too forceful, or I think it's a delicate balance.
Probably not the right person to ask. I'm not very good at asking for what I'm worth. Although I would say that writing it down, writing it in a document is a lot easier than confronting somebody and saying, can I have a pay rise? Or, can you just bump that up a couple of $100 an hour? Or I think writing down your request is a lot easier. There are many courses you can take around negotiation, increasing your capacity to learn how to be a better negotiator. So maybe engage in some of that. And talk to men, because men are really good at negotiating. Ask them. They'll tell you.
I did that before my last contract negotiation. I asked two of my best male colleagues, and they were like, you just ask and you don't take no for an answer. And it just hadn't occurred to me that you could push back. So I think we had a question right up the back of the room. If you could just raise your hand.
Hi.
Oh, lovely.
Hello. Yes, thank you, Kat. That was fabulous, and it's so important to have this discussion at International Women's Day. I just want to pick up on your comment about women in prison. This is an area that we often neglect, I believe, when we're talking about women's empowerment. And it seems to me that two of the things you talk about today are really important for women in prison, or financial literacy, which is something we've heard repeated today, but also courses for women on starting businesses. And of course, as you said, we have an overrepresentation of Indigenous women in prisons. So are you aware of programs that are doing this work? How can we address this area better on this incredibly important day today?
Really great question. Thank you for asking that. I am not aware of any programs. And in fact, I have myself tried to suggest to Justice Services that I'd be happy to go into prisons and teach women how to start their businesses. Many, many moons ago, when I was a lot younger, I volunteered at Yasma Juvenile Detention Centre. It was a female juvenile centre in Sydney. And I used to go in there on alternate Saturdays and teach the young girls craft. And I really enjoyed it. I think I got more out of that than I feel they did. I mean, I know they got a lot out of it, but it really, my auntie actually, Shireen Malamu, she was involved with the parole board in New South Wales, and she used to come home and tell me about her visits to the female juvenile detention centre, and I said, how can I help? And I had a little craft stall at a market, Balmain Markets actually, and I kind of got bored of it, and I thought, well, let me take all of this stuff and go and teach these young girls how to create nice little crafty things. And they loved it. So I'm accustomed to going into detention centres, and I would love to do this work for women in prison, because if we can give them some tools while they're incarcerated, when they come back out into society, they can start their own businesses. In fact, they could probably start them while they're in prison. Because when they come out into society, it'll be much harder for them to find work. So why not teach them, a new skill?
Absolutely. We probably have time for one more question. I think there was one, just down here, up right at the front. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lensa, and I'm a Year 12 student at Canberra Girls Grammar School.
Hi.
And firstly, I just want to thank you for coming here today. I really valued everything you said, and I think you're really inspiring. And I guess one thing I'm interested in after school is politics. And I guess looking at the field now, it's very male-dominated, and we haven't got many people who are culturally diverse. So my question to you is, what's one piece of advice that you would give to a young woman who would like to pursue a career in politics, particularly one that would face these intersectionality issues?
Great question. And really great to hear from young people interested in politics. We need more of that. I would say check out politicsincolor.com. It's my other little side business. We actually teach women how to get elected. We teach women of colour how to get elected. So if you link up to us, we'll be running workshops in the near future. And so we teach First Nations women and women of colour. It's a very short incubator workshop. And then we encourage you to go into the Pathways to Politics program, which is the accelerator program. So that's where you really put meat on the bones in terms of understanding how to survive, how to get elected, and also how to survive in politics. So there are some really good programs out there. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Well, that's all we have time for. Kat, thank you so much for joining us. It's been very insightful and great to get to know you today. So if we could all give Kat a big round of applause.